Winter has arrived, and I hope everyone wanted to came here safely. And this morning we have a range of submitters to hear from. I'm told that submitter Nicola Calcott is not attending. My estimation is there are probably going to be some gaps of time in this timetable during the course of the morning. And if that's the case, it's probably useful to have Mr. Lowe coming in and out to take us through the conditions, because we'd benefit from understanding those. So as time allows, we can go through that sequentially, so that we use the time available as productively as we can. So the first person this morning is Dave Ritchie from Cycle Journey.
Who's tucking behind you?
Right, have a seat here.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Who am I speaking with?
John Marston on the chair, Tim Vile, and Mark Geddes.
John, Tim, Matt. Nice to meet you guys. Shall I just speak?
Yeah. So we've read your submission.
It was pretty brief, I suspect.
Yeah, it was. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll begin with a brief story, if I may. When I was a young man, which was some time ago now, I had the experience of paddling through underneath the Clutha Dam when it was in construction. So you've got to imagine that the Clutha River is flowing down through the Clutha Gorge at this point in time, just above Cromwell, above Clyde. And the Clyde Dam is in place, except for a plug at the bottom where the entire river is flowing through. And it was completely illegal, I understand that now. But it was a remarkable experience, and that we were trying to paddle the rapids in the river Onakaika that were scheduled to be drowned by the dam. So Sagas Weir, Lipstick, the Cromwell Gap. These were like iconic rapids at the time. And at the end of that trip, it seemed only right to paddle through the dam, kind of as a moment. It was pretty impressive as a thing. It's a couple of 100 meters long at its base, and so you had to paddle through this pretty narrow tunnel that's square and concrete rough, and the entire Clutha River is flowing through at that point. There's a wave in the middle that you couldn't see, so you were all of a sudden engulfed in water in the dark, and it was quite terrifying, actually. If you can imagine that. I was about 17 at the time, I suspect. In that moment, it was a adrenaline fueled, risky thing that a 17-year-old does. Over time, as the experience kind of comes back to me again and again, I think about the narrative that gets created by the fact that my realization that a public natural resource was being drowned for power by the government at that point in time, but could equally be said for commercial interests these days. That narrative was the original narrative. There was never a blank slate where the environment and economic interests were starting from zero. There was no tabula rasa ever. Yeah, there was always, this happens, and then the Resource Management Act came into being in order to fight that. And that narrative, to my perspective, casts the environment and nature as the underdog in the story, which everybody loves, and that's why the commercial interests are the commercial overdog, and that's why everyone hates them. That's the narrative that we exist with, and it actually doesn't help anybody as a narrative. The environment never gets a look in because it's never a fair fight. They're the underdog. David throwing stones at Goliath. The corporation is the evil overdog. That doesn't help them either. Everyone hates them, but when in fact, oftentimes they're trying to do the right thing. It doesn't help our society either, because we get a very inefficient process by which we kind of get along together. It's combative and not that useful really. And so I've always, well, not always, but over time I've used that experience to kind of illustrate my dissatisfaction with that narrative. Here, and this is the third time I've submitted on things like this for various, sometimes personally, sometimes for organisations, this type of organisation. I've usually submitted, I think always submitted in favour of the development. I think that if we start with the answer as yes, let's do this, and then figure out how, that's a better place to start than no, don't do this, prove to us why you should do it. That it doesn't really help us. So that's why, as a representative of Cycle Journeys, a company that places people on bikes, which are made of metal, which is mined from the ground. We drive them in our vehicles to the start of the trail. They ride the trail over this trail over 4 days. We have 4 trails in this country that we're using, 1 in Samoa. So we're putting our businesses to put people on bikes and in nature so that they can experience health, social connection, and a bit of wonder and awe. And that's the message we get back from that time. That's what we're in business on. So it seems odd possibly that we are submitting in support of a mine that is going to visually degrade and environmentally degrade the surrounding environment of the trail, which is part of our income. It's key to our income. I guess our perspective is that, yep, that will happen. I haven't read any of the documentation around what the environment stuff looks like. It's not my area of expertise. It's not what I do. Yeah, I have to trust that other people make the correct decisions around that stuff. And at the end of the process, Westland Mineral Sands will leave the place in a better place than what it was when it started, or at least as good as. We have to trust that. I have to trust that process. That's what you guys will charge of. The Cycle Journeys, who I work for, has a kind of operating philosophy of leave better. So we subsidise the maintenance and the health and the resilience of the trails that we operate on, that our riders ride on, with money and sweat every year in order to keep the trail in great condition. We know from MB that the cycle industry in this country on those great rides, the 23 great rides, of which this is one of the best, in fact, is worth about $1 billion a year in the New Zealand economy. They probably use the multiplier of 3, which makes sense in terms of when I think about what we turn over here and what the entirety of the travel network in New Zealand is like. Yeah. So it's a significant, relatively low impact undertaking. So we come from a position of lead better. And I think in my discussions with Westland Mineral Sands, which have been light and introductory and brief, but the intent and the early relationship building that we've experienced so far would lead me to support the idea that they would in fact leave better and can in fact leave better, and that their intent would be to do so. They haven't demonstrated that yet, but at this point in time, I'm willing to say, yeah, let's do this and work out how. They do actually have a track record here. They've got an operation up in Bulla, and the Kawatiri Coastal Trail, which has just opened in March this year and is a fabulous piece of trail and community asset. It's very similar to this. They worked with the Kawatiri Coastal Trail Trust to there was a synergy whereby the trust got trail built off road, and the mine got to make their kind of safe traffic plan work using the road. So there was a symbiosis there, which worked very well. There is a similar symbiosis here, where there is an opportunity to create a trail asset that would complement and offset the existing trail asset and help keep this trail relevant and modern and new, and give more options for the local community in particular, but also for the trail itself as a kind of going concern. Yeah, these things need to keep refreshing themselves. And the opportunity here is one where is to create a loop around Lake Mananui. And so the existing trail heads from Hokitika out through past scenic waterways along the edge of the wetland, through the wetland, in fact, and then up and over into the treetop walkway, and then down and around onto the main highway at Pairi Road. From that point there, it's possible on public road and paper road along the coast to bring the trail north along the coast, bring it in back through Lake Mananui, connect it through about 1 kilometre of land, dockland, north to the southern boundary of the mine, along the edge of the mine between the mine and the wetland, and then hook back into the trail at Mananui Bridge just south of Scenic Waterways. Now, from a commercial standpoint, that's a fabulous product. Yeah, that's a great product. From a community recreation standpoint, that's a 25, 30 kilometre off-road, largely off-road cycle ride, which is a brilliant asset. And because it ties in the custom-built section of cycle trail that's already in place, which is beautiful. It ties in a historic piece of tramway. It ties in the treetop walkway and the commercial asset there. It ties in the coast. So the ride takes you through rainforest behind a lake out to the coast. It takes you past the Mananui pub. It brings you back into Lake Mananui. It takes you past an operating mine, which would be a chance to tell the story of, look at what the mine has facilitated for the community. And when the mine goes away after however many years and they've done their thing, then we're left with a fabulous community asset and ideally a pristine environment. So there's a great story to tell there of partnership, not of combativeness. That's a much better narrative, I think. That helps us forward a lot more. Just off the top of my head, without actually looking at the website, but there are trail counters on the trail. And that Mahirapua section of the trail is one of the most popular sections of this trail. In fact, the most popular section of trail in the country is the section at Kororo and Greymouth. It gets lots and lots and lots of recreational use, tens of thousands of users a year. We probably get, I think if you were to boil it down correctly, you'd probably get about 9,000 or 10,000 riders riding the through trail over kind of 2 to 4 days. Yep. But the numbers for the sections of trail that are closer to town, Canary, lots of local riders, tens of thousands of riders and users, walkers as well. Yep, increasingly. The biggest event on the trail is a running event. So there's lots of ducks that have to line up and fly in a straight line in a nice V yet, with very early stage discussions with Westland Mineral Sands. But they've got a track record of making it work, albeit light, but at least it's in the right direction. There's a brilliant opportunity here. Really, their contribution is permission, access, storytelling, machinery, time. The cost of building this, the missing link of trail right now is probably, I've heard estimates of what the mine might be worth over time. I don't know how accurate they are, but the amount that it would take to build that trail is less than 0.1% of what that total take might be. Very possibly. Even if I'm by a factor of 10 out, it's still a tiny amount of money or tiny amount of your total revenue over time to contribute to the benefit of the community. And I think if we were to start back with that tabula rasa, with that blank slate where it wasn't the environment as the underdog, throwing stones at the clipboard evil Goliath, then that would be a very reasonable amount of money to spend out of the total take. So I guess that's the position that we come from. There's an opportunity for Westland Mineral Sands to leave something better here, to leave something really good behind. They've demonstrated a willingness to at least talk about it. And it's really, in terms of building a mine, it's not that big of a deal. We're not talking about a huge amount of distance or even width of trail. It's a trail that's 2.5 meters wide. It's not that long. Come on. So yeah, that's why Cycle Journeys is happy to submit its support at the moment. pending all of those other things as well, ducks that have got to line up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just one question. Thank you for that submission. We've had quite a bit of discussion through submissions about potential conflicts between trucks and state highway sites and cyclists between Ruatapu and Ironside. Can you just with some detail your experiences of people cycling?
Sure. So in an ideal world, bikes don't go on roads because most drivers don't ride bikes, and so they've never had the experience of being, overtaken by a logging truck at 100k an hour. Yep. And this trail goes to some length. I think in terms of its development priorities, it's about getting bikes off the roads. In the section between Ruatapu and the mine site, the trail crosses the main road at one point. Yeah. There is currently in place a high water detour. So when the wetland floods, there's an old section of boardwalk that the riders currently ride across the wetlands, which can flood, and that forces riders onto the road. It'd be great to not have to do that. And so this new section of trail that if it gets constructed would mean that riders cross the road twice. Once at the Mananui rail bridge at St. Waterways and the kiosk just south of town, and once again at Pioneer Road. Yeah, so that would be, in terms of safety, it would actually minimise further the contact that cyclists might have with vehicles on that road. Between here and the mine site, we only cross the road once anyway on the trail. Having a network of trails that are kind of interchangeable and interlinkable is always preferable to having one. Always.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chief, for your very interesting perspective on this. You might have heard me ask a question to the landscape architect yesterday about I asked her, how many people actually use this trail, and she didn't know, but I think you've suggested there's probably about 10,000 people a year. Is that correct?
That's through riders.
Yeah.
So that's people who come to the town, who are riding. Probably a half to 2/3 of those would be riding with commercial operators. There's 2 commercial operators in town, and the rest of them are what we call FITs, so free independent riders. They come with their own volition and they stay somewhere for a few days and ride their bikes. They often piece the trail together in bits, and so a fully accurate count is quite difficult. But the furthest part of the trail out at Carwalker, where there's a trail counter, which is the most likely to give you the most accurate number of through riders, is something in the region of 8 to 10,000.
Yeah,
right. I'm going from memory here. I do look at the numbers, but it's.
I suppose I asked that question because I assumed that there would be, an effect on the people using that track. But your view, if I summarise correctly, is that actually you think it may add because you can tell a story about the mine. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that I really do believe that the narrative we have of the kind of underdog, overdog narrative, which is a really easy narrative for people to get a hold of. It's kind of a classic story arc. With the environment cast as the underdog constantly, because that's how it started, is not helpful. And I don't think that we are going to change that national narrative or even global narrative here, but we can at least tell a story that's different. And I think that that's the real value here. And if I understand Westland Mineral Sands has the intention to do more on the coast, we'll at least start the story differently.
Yeah.
So we don't fall into the same trap.
And so you see the different, I suppose, elements of the track, the tramway, the lake, the biodiversity, the mine as sort of opportunities to stop and tell stories and enrich the experience.
When we get feedback from riders, which we do a lot, we see, because of the way the trail operates kind of commercially, we see riders every day. And so we're hearing fresh, hot takes on the trail every day. As a rule, people love the variety. They love the fact that at the end of the trail in Greenup, it spits them out on the coast and they're riding on the coast. They love the fact that they feel like they're in the big mountains when they're riding back or up to the Ruatapu River and the town area there. They love the fact that they're in the rainforest. You know, if you can put all that into a day ride as well, that brings a whole new range of riders who only have time for one day to ride a phenomenal and get a phenomenal experience. It's a very coast experience that's a difficult experience to get in other parts of the country. Rainforest, history, coastal aspect, west coast, you know, you're riding on the beach. You'll be riding on the beach for probably 3 or 4 kilometres. Amazing. You know, old pubs, old historic stuff, a mine that made the whole thing possible. Wow, what a great story.
Well, that's very interesting. And you also see the mine as an opportunity to extend that track, and they have suggested that that could be something they'll do in the future. Because you know there has been submissions saying that the mine could potentially have an adverse effect on tourism, but you know, from listening to you today, it sounds like you're saying all this is actually going to enrich the tourism experience, plus also the new track, if that comes about, will actually increase that track network and therefore provide a better tourism benefit, I suppose.
Well, so there's a range of things in there that you hit on. One is that from a commercial perspective, so speaking with my Cycle Journeys hat on right now, speaking from a commercial perspective, a trail network that offers a variety of products is better than a single trail. Yeah, because it means you can talk to more people and offer more people an experience. We already know that cycling has been really good for Whakatuma. You don't have to. In fact, you can't get a parking yourself because there's Audis with 50 grand of e-bikes dripping off the back of the John's. We've got one at home. You know, that's what it's like. And
It's not that much.
What we notice is that those people are staying in town for 4 to 5 days. And the average bed night stay on the West Coast has been 1.2 months. And here you've got a cycle trail that bring people to town for 4 nights. We've now got a product between the West Coast Wilderness Trail, the Kawatiri Coastal Trail, and the Nelson Great Taste Trail. We've got groups of Australians who are coming over here to ride for 10 days, and they're on the coast for 6 of those. So this is a different kind of, it's a really high quality, slow, specific niche kind of tourism. That's just one aspect. But from a recreational amenity aspect, again, the network, the ability to go for a 25-kilometre after work blast on your gravel bike, or to go for a run, or to walk your dog, or to take your e-bike out, whatever, that's improving the recreational amenity of the town, which, the West Coast lacks loops. Yeah, it's difficult to find a trail that you can do in a loop. There are actually 3 options, 3 loops that can be built, 4 actually, that can be built in connection with the existing wilderness trail, that all touch parts of the trail, that all start and finish in the same place, that all offer a day ride opportunity. And there's one that offers a 100-kilometre ride, which would be around Whakatuma Basin, which would tie in all of this. And so the opportunity here is great. The resource for developing it is less great. Westland Mineral Sands actually offers a bit of resource to help create that. And they're actually offering right now, in the early stages of the conversation, they're offering a willingness to talk about it. So there's tourism benefit. Some people will look, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this. But actually, if they go there and you talk to them about it, if the sign says, hey, made possible by, because, and how, then it's changing the way that people might look at that kind of stuff. It's a small project in the big scheme of things, but it's actually got the ability to change the story.
Thank you, Mr. Ritchie. You well and truly answered my question. Thanks very much for your time.
I just I'm not from this area, so I'm just trying to land with what we're talking about, and we were talking about.
Sure.
So I've got a graphics map in front of me.
Do I have the same map?
We could possibly bring it up, Tim, which is the latest version of the landscape graphic. And page 4. So that's the graphic I'm looking at. And there's a walkway identified called tramline track.
Gone the wrong way. Page 1.
Tab 1.
Tab 1. Tab, oh, I see. I'm like, how can I go the wrong way to page 1?
So you see the tramline track there. Is that the cycleway that you're referring to? Or is
Mananui tramline, Mananui walkway.
yeah,
That is part of the cycle trail. It's the existing. It's the part that follows the old Mananui tram. So it's the old bush tram.
yeah,
That's the historic part of the trail.
right.
So where it runs along, where it runs from the main highway, set and makes that kind of south and east jig into the purple. That's not part of the existing cycleway.
So there's a cycleway near here.
The cycleway starts right there, at the end of the street.
Yeah.
It's across the bridge. And what's not marked on this map is the piece of cycleway that runs from the golf course just south of town, crosses the main highway into the forest, and has been custom built as part of the cycleway development.
Right.
And it joins the trail you're looking at where the yellow turns to purple, essentially, right at that.
Oh, I see. So it goes down through the creek
There's
there.
a map there of this says Westland Trail.
Yeah.
So that starts there,
Okay.
Greymouth goes all the way down past Okataka, then that's the lake there, then goes to Ross. Sorry, it's brought up in.
No, you're all good. When you get a break this afternoon, swing up, we just round the corner, swing in, and I'll take you and show you.
Yeah, well, I'm probably going to do a bike. I won't get into it, but I'm probably going to do a bike ride here.
Yeah. Because what you can do is it's easy to get to.
Yeah.
And you'll go, oh wow, this is pretty cool. And you'll see, oh, here's the potential it's the missing link in the chain.
So which is the missing link?
So to get around the lake, so we're talking about where the yellow trail at Mananui turns to purple trail, right where it crosses the creek there.
Yeah.
If you follow the yellow boundary of the mine, south along the creek.
Right.
Yep. That's where the new trail could go.
Yeah.
Where it hits the green at the southern end of the mine.
Yeah.
That's dockland. Yeah. And you pretty much continue south until you meet up to purple again at the Lake Mananui recreation.
Oh, I see. So you're
Yeah.
saying you go on the true left bank of the
Correct.
Mahanapua Creek
Yep.
to Wharewhare.
Yep.
And link through there. So
Yep.
I get it.
Yep. So it's the eastern boundary of the mine,
Yeah.
which I understand is the bit that's on the forest. So we're years away from this, but this is, all of a sudden you make that link to Lake Mananui, then you ride out, cross the main road again at the Mananui pub. Nice. And then out to the coast, and there's a paper road along the edge of the coast, just inside the dunes. The dunes. Yep. Which runs south down to Ruatapu sawmill. And the trail actually hooks in where the main road turns inland at Pairi Road. That's where the trail is there.
Right.
On the map here, I'm just looking at the inside, it goes along the road, is that correct? It goes around the lake, then back down the state highway, but you're saying there's a paper road down the coast.
So I'm not sure what map you're looking at.
The Westland Wilderness Trail.
Okay, so the trail is beside the road and crosses the road where it needs to.
So like the 9 mile trail.
9 mile trail.
The 9 mile beach in Bulla by 9 Mile Beach. It's a sort of walkway or cycleway.
Sure. So where there's existing road reserve, the trail goes in the road reserve, parallel with the road, and then if it needs to cross, it does. So yeah, so the riders are forced to slow down, look, and there's an obvious crossing orange things and signs and what have you. That's far safer than trying to ride along the road. The high water detour I spoke of before, which comes into play when the boardwalk is flooded, which happens occasionally, but not that often.
So this is around the lake or the river?
So the boardwalk is in the wetlands.
Okay.
So people can't ride that, they're forced to ride back around the road, and they ride down that Mananui, the yellow piece of trail at the boundary of the line.
And do you pick people up at that Ross? Well, or do they?
Well, so in general, we would take people to Ross and then begin their ride. They ride from Ross to Ruatapu one day. Ideally, they'd ride to Milltown the next day, then to Kamara the next day, then to Greenock. But that's the classic. There's a couple of issues with Bridges accommodation at the moment. That means that we run the trail differently commercially. But because nothing on the trail is even more than a half-hour drive away, you have options.
Right.
So we can make
And each leg is on average what?
40 to 50 kilometres a day.
Right.
That's about as much as most people want to ride before they bump against sore and they want to stop for a cocktail.
Yeah. And just on this point about the tourist offering, there's some evidence about the economic value of this mine has been about 80% GDP of the dairy factory. Does that, in your opinion, as an operator, add to the vitality of the town as part of the overall package?
Yes, when I think about the vitality, so I'll clarify one point first, and I'll come back to the vitality of the town thing. So 90% of the great riders are New Zealanders. Yep, it's Kiwis coming to ride their own country. Yep, after that it's Aussies, and after that it's Americans and Northern Europeans. We are, our market, 5 to 10% of our riders are from somewhere other than New Zealand or Australia. Yep, so we're talking about local visitation. We don't even really scratch the surface of international visitation using this product. So that's still to come. Tourism New Zealand doing it right now. In terms of the vitality of the town and what it means, I think that it's pretty demonstrable that when people come to ride, they're staying for a few days at a time. They're staying in accommodation providers, they're eating in restaurants, they're drinking in bars, they're buying gas, they're buying food. They're everywhere. You know, and the whole town is absorbing that impact, which is really nice. I don't know if you could make the same argument about a mine. So would it add to the vitality of the town in that way? I'm sure that brings, you know, employment and therefore families to the town, and therefore, you know, families into schools and community groups. That, you know, that's a different kind of vitality, I guess. It's much more difficult for me to know what that might look like. But it's, you know, it's the two are probably complementary, but I don't think they're the same.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Time.
Let's go. Dismissed.
Yes.
Okay. Come and see us in the
Yeah. So you're just around the corner.
yeah, just around the corner, literally. That lady knows how to show you where we are.
So Heath Bell is here. And we've got Forest and Bird. She's going to pop in after.
She's here.
She not yet, but she's going to go a little bit earlier. Okay. So he's Roland. Sorry.
All right. So, no. Well, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good. Your familiar face, and read your submission. So our floor is yours.
Okay, I did send through some slides yesterday, which hopefully we'll be able to bring up. So essentially, the submission that we put in, I wanted to sort of add some context around why we've got a view that we have. So I do have a hard copy, but if we don't have, can't bring it up, then I can just take you through it verbally if that's okay.
Okay, we'll just see if we just bring it up, but if not.
Tim did acknowledge he received it, so. But maybe just to the start, so I am Chief Executive of Development West Coast. Development West Coast is the regional economic development agency. We also have a role in commercial finance for West Coast businesses, and our investments that we make in West Coast businesses essentially are to grow the economy and grow sustainable jobs. So just wanted to clear now that as part of that role, the trust has made an investment in Westland Mineral Sands, so we are a shareholder in Westland Mineral Sands, and that's on the basis that the company will bring, or is already bringing, but continues to bring sustainable jobs and economic growth to the region.
Right, so that's not finance, that's actually investment.
Yep, we've got an equity stake in Westland Mineral Sands.
But you also do finance?
We also do finance with, we do a mixture of commercial loans. We do some grants to community groups, and we've got equity in a number of businesses. And essentially, the reason we've chosen to invest directly in Westland Mineral Sands and a number of other businesses is that while the economic benefits will bring job growth and economic growth, as the custodians of the trust fund for all of the 34,000 West Coasters, the idea is that we'll also get a share in the profitability of these businesses as well for the entire region.
And so where did the original capital come from for that? Was it
the original capital was a settlement package from the Labor government in 2001 or 2000. It was settled in 2001. And that was as a result of the cessation of Indigenous logging. So native timber logging was finished, and there was a settlement package put into the coast. That was 92 million into the trust and 7 million to each of the 4 councils in 2001.
right?
So we just move on one more. So what we looked at was, does this project align strategically with the region? And there are, so the West Coast has Te Whanakitanga strategy, which is out to 2050, and the Mananui project lines up with one of the priorities there, which is around sustainable resource use to drive growth. It also lines up with the government's Going for Growth strategy, the current government, because it unlocks mineral potential and supports the overall economic objectives. Also supports clean energy transition. So we've got a West Coast renewable energy strategy, which has been endorsed by the region. The minerals that are extracted are critical for renewable energy projects. I won't go into the details there, but New Zealand also has a mineral strategy, and this project certainly lines up with those as well. So looking at export revenue, again, won't go into the overall numbers, but essentially the project supports significant growth in GDP for the region, and export revenue, which is something that the country is certainly looking for at the moment. Go one more. Looking at the project directly, up to 70 jobs. The median salary in mineral extraction is over $100,000, which is significantly higher than the national average. And of course, the multiplier effect, which there's various arguments for that, but it is north of 2 additional jobs for every job created in the mineral sector. So we haven't put a figure up there for that, but there certainly needs to be acknowledged.
With the Westport one, have you seen that? So we often hear these figures, but have you seen that translate into jobs outside the mine?
Yes, we have. It is hard to put a figure on it. But what we have seen is actually last year the GDP, or year to March GDP in the Buller region reduced, and that was due to the closure of the Tawhai tunnel in the Buller Gorge. which restricted coal exports out of Stockton significantly. And I think that's, while I'm going to come to later that there's historically there's a sort of boom and bust in the mineral sector. That's certainly impacted on the Buller region in the last 12 months. But overall, the job growth is associated with 9 Mile. We're definitely seeing that multiplier effect. So if we just go one more, this sort of illustrates the GDP contribution per job in various sectors. So mining is by far and above the highest contributor as far as productivity goes of any sector. And if you look at the far right, the West Coast is the first of the highest green line. So the average productivity of a job on the West Coast is 172,000 versus the national average of 149. So and that reflects both the primary sector and the mining sector being significantly higher on the West Coast than it is in other parts of the country. And I just note, we do get, and I should acknowledge too that DWC is also the regional tourism organisation, so we promote visitation and tourism as a destination here. But the third to last blue line, which is sitting at 66,000 GDP contribution per job in accommodation and food services. So while it's an important sector to the region, as far as productivity go, mining far outweighs it. One more. So this is where I mentioned earlier that we have had traditionally a sort of boom and bust cycle as far as minerals here on the coast. So if you look at that period, the first where it's going up there between those two yellow lines, that's the mining growth period. So that's when solar energy was really going well, and GDP of the region was climbing significantly. That peak is in 2012, and I won't go into what happened in 2012, but that was the sort of demise of solid energy, and we saw a significant reduction in GDP over that period. So since 2018, it started to climb again, which is as a result of some diversification in the economy. So there's a lot of factors impacting on that, but minerals are certainly in there. Go one more.
We're not sharing the screen with the online viewer, but
So just a question back a slide. You're saying that mining has a far bigger influence than tourism. So that's a GDP contribution per job, as opposed to an overall what it's bringing to the economy. Because I think we heard from the economist, I think he was talking about 230 million for the tourism and about 70 million for this mine. So does that sound about right?
They sound a bit low for both, actually. But that previous slide, if we go one more, sorry, go ahead. No, go back again. Yep, that one. So that's actually total GDP. So that's not per job. That's total GDP. But if we go ahead, one more. What we've done here is we've broken it down into the various mining sectors. So if you look at the green line is the total GDP, and if you look at the blue line, that is mining, that is coal mining. The orange line is gold, and the one that dips away at the bottom is supporting services to mining. So essentially, what we're sort of illustrating here is that the various, we've traditionally relied on gold and coal, and over that period, they both followed a similar pattern, and that's why we've got that peak.
The green line on the x-axis starts at 2000.
Yep.
If you do a trend line, it's actually has gone down somewhat over that 25-year period. At the top, at the end, 2000, you're still, is that part of the logging and mining going well, or what's just describe what's been happening there?
Yeah, so this is actually this is just mining. So
okay.
this slide is just those mining areas. So obviously in 2000, both coal and gold were coming off a peak.
Yeah.
And through that sort of the early 2000s, it was sort of steady, but then it had a as the global economy improved, we saw a significant increase in that GDP contribution from both.
Right.
Until we hit the wall in about 2012.
So when you say it's coming off a peak, was that peak production? Was coming down, or was it commodity prices going down?
And more about production.
Right.
Yes, more about production. Yeah, overall, the trend line in commodity prices, if you follow that, while there was a significant dip in that sort of 2012 period, the trend line is up. So demand for these commodities is increasing.
What's the GDP of the region graph like in that period?
That's actually here. So if you go back one, back just one, so go forward. Yeah, so that's the total GDP.
Right.
So if you look at the very bottom, the yellow line is agriculture, forestry, and fishing, which is obviously significant to the region, and the line below that is tourism. So very steady over that whole period. But there's the tourism line does have a dip, and that's COVID.
Right. So is it the top line that shows the overall GDP?
The top line is total GDP for the region.
Yeah.
Yep. So if we just go ahead to that one. So I suppose the key message here is that while minerals extraction is a significant impact on the region, we do have that volatility due to market demand. So what's important is that we diversify our whole economy, and bringing in a new commodity, so heavy mineral sands, actually will help to iron out some of those peaks. So if you look at the year ending March, we saw an 18% dip in coal prices, so they've been very strong, but they've come down significantly. But conversely, gold has appreciated significantly. That's 38% in a year, and I think that previously it would have been a similar number. So it's gold has essentially doubled in the last couple of years. Go one more. So this one is employment. So the previous slides we're looking at overall GDP. We're now looking at employment, and again that same period of growth, we saw a significant increase in jobs and number of employed people. So 1,700 additional jobs over that rising period. And then during after it hit the wall, we had a significant reduction in the overall jobs for the region. So essentially follows that same pattern in GDP. We go one more with a breakdown of the employment. So the blue line is coal mining. So that's where solar energy ceased to exist. We had a significant decrease in overall employment in that sector. And if you look out to the right, that has a sort of breakdown of, in that mineral sector, we've got, we started off at that peak in 2012 with about 68% of those people employed in the coal mining sector. Now today we're looking at 60%, but it's a much lower base. So we've come on significantly, but there is still a spread in those various mining sectors. Go one more. I wanted to touch on tourism, as I know that there are some concerns around whether mining will impact on tourism, and I think the message here is the blue line is the mining GDP, and the red line is tourism GDP, and there's really no correlation between those peaks and troughs in mining and tourism. Tourism was essentially increasing steadily, slowly but steadily over that period until we hit COVID. That's really the only thing that's impacted on tourism over that sort of 25-year period. Go one more. And again, this is all over the place. This is actually visitor spend growth. So this is about increase in or decrease in spend. And again, there's really no correlation. So the blue line is tourism. So the middle is the base. So if it's below that, it's dropping. If it's above that, it's increasing. And there's really no, as I say, no correlation. The key impact on tourism is actually COVID. What does impact on tourism? Essentially, the two sort of key areas there, other than COVID, is relating to events. So there was a noticeable drop off in following the Christchurch earthquake, which is understandable, and the Kaikoura earthquake as well. So that's impacted on international visitors visiting the South Island, and that has a knock-on effect with visitors to the region. So this is the national numbers versus the West Coast numbers. So blue is West Coast, red is national, and essentially it's following the same pattern. Yep, one more. So I think the other sort of key message here is that mining has had a significant influence on the region, not just in GDP and job growth. We would argue that mining has historically underpinned some indicators of regional well-being, and I'll go into that in a socio-economic sense in the next couple of slides. So one of the key indicators is population, and the latest census shows that the West Coast has actually increased to over 34,000. So that's the most biggest population the West Coast has ever had, I believe. And over that decline in the mining sector from 2012 on, we saw a significant decrease in overall population. So that's turned around, and that is largely. It's not just to do with minerals, but it's largely to do with the economic opportunities that are here on the coast in total. This next one is about the age of population. So the West Coast has got one of the oldest average population ages in the country. If you look at the peak of mining, we were around about where the rest of the country was on average, and since that time, there's been a significant decoupling of the average age of West Coasters versus the average age of the rest of the country. And that's essentially the good opportunities for young people have been off the coast, so they've been leaving in droves. And one of the key key reasons that as the Economic Development Agency, we're supporting projects like Mananui, is to open up opportunities for young people to actually come back or remain here on the coast. Yep. And employment levels. So what this is showing is that when the mining industry was at its peak, the region had a significantly lower unemployment rate than the rest of the country. So that's that middle part of the graph. Today we're sort of running alongside the rest of the country, in fact slightly below still. But when we saw the decline in mining, we saw a significant increase in unemployment. And again, we talked about productivity earlier, so this one is actually about per capita income, and essentially over that, so the West Coast is so historically below the average in the country. Once we got to a peak in mining, the average income was on a par with the rest of the country. Slightly came below that when solar energy disappeared, but we're now back to where we sort of level with the rest of the country on average. As I mentioned before, retaining youth is a key sort of driver of the regional strategy to grow the economy. And getting a bit more sort of specific around this project, Westland Mineral Sands we do work with them not just as a shareholder but as a development agency, and they've got internships and scholarships that are supporting young people to get degrees and come back to and remain on the West Coast. It's a significant focus for the company. I won't speak for them, but we're certainly very supportive of the work they're doing in that space. And again, we've invested in Westland Mineral Sands to try and retain some of the benefits to the West Coast community, and the other side of that too is that infrastructure for exports and connectivity in the region is something that the company is supporting. The Mananui project is key to the upgrade of the Greymouth port, which is partly funded, and that work is due to start in the next short while. But without this project, that port is probably not going to be viable going forward. And I think that's pretty much a conclusion. So I won't go into that other than the reasons that I've talked about earlier. This project is a key one, particularly for the Western region, to diversify the economy. We believe that the environmental credentials of Western Mineral Sands show that they're going to do it properly, and we really urge the consent to be approved.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Teague?
Just one question about
Sorry, Mr. Mill.
the Greymouth port.
Yep.
So what was currently the challenge with making it operational?
It needs some investment. So there's essentially the Greymouth port has been used for fishing in recent years, and there's been some investment in the infrastructure around supporting the fishing fleet and actually bringing some more vessels in to do maintenance, etc. But the port itself, as far as exporting commodities, hasn't really been used for many years. So that we were exporting some coal out of there many years ago. The current proposal will start to improve that infrastructure so that we can start to utilise the port to export commodities, including heavy mineral sands. There is still some investment required to complete that project, but that probably won't happen unless this project gets underway.
Just one question. Are you saying there's obviously a peak of coal mining? Is there a gradual downward trend on that, or is it sort of stable at the moment?
Right now it's pretty stable, but coal mining is probably a sunset industry. It's debatable how long the demand for coal will continue. There's certainly thermal coal. There's a shift to other alternatives. One of the issues with that is the availability of alternative energy to replace that. So I think we will see demand for thermal coal continue in the medium term anyway, but it's quite hard to get projects funded just due to availability of capital for that sector. Stockton is obviously the biggest coal export or coal producer on the west coast. They are looking at consenting the next stage of the mine up there, and that's coking coal that goes to all parts of the world for mainly steel manufacture. So different market. That will demand for that is not going away, but the availability of it will eventually reduce.
Okay. Very good.
I have no questions. Thank you very much for your time. Very clear presentation.
Yeah.
All right. So the question is whether Nikki Stoyank is here yet.
She's on.
Oh, she's online. Okay. Good. Everyone. Right. Welcome, Ms. Stoyank. You're here presenting on behalf of Forest and Bird. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Fine. Can you hear me
I
okay?
can't hear you.
Oh, stand by and I'll switch to my headset.
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Oh, I'll come a little closer to my speaker. How's that?
That's perfect. Thank you. I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Kia ora. Well, good morning, Commissioners. My name is Nikki Stoyank and I'm here to speak on behalf of Forest and Bird. Forest and Bird made a submission in opposition to the application for the sand mine at Mananui, and on the basis that it does not promote sustainable management and it's contrary to the purpose of the Resource Management Act, and that it does not provide for matters of national importance. In section 6, predominantly of concern to Forest and Bird is the protection of the natural character of wetlands and their margins, and also the protection of significant Indigenous vegetation and significant habitats of Indigenous fauna, section 6A and 6C respectively. And also that it is contrary to policies to protect Indigenous biodiversity in the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, and the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. And that it is also contrary to the Regional Policy Statement and district plan provisions for Indigenous biodiversity. And we agree with Mr. Payne that the ecology information supplied by the applicant was insufficient, and therefore it was difficult to assess the effects of the activity on the environment and on Indigenous species and their habitat. And specifically of concern to Forest and Bird are at-risk and threatened native species, including avifauna species such as fernbirds and bitterns that are known to exist in the area, and of course Westland petrel that we've been concerned about with other mining activities on the west coast. Also lizards, native lizards in the area, long-tailed bats, invertebrates, and freshwater native species and coastal species that use the area. And we are especially concerned with the effects of the activity on freshwater habitats like Lake Mahinapua and the creeks that feed into it, and also the scheduled and potential wetlands in and around the proposed mine site. So just wanted to highlight those points in our submission. We also think that there's no functional need for the activity to locate in the wetlands, in these wetlands. We think that if you are of mind to grant the consents, then Forest and Bird supports Mr. Payne's recommendations set out in his evidence on points 97 to 101 about the conditions for mitigating ecological effects. We also support the condition 7.3 in the proposed conditions in the section 42A report, which sets out that mining starts at the least ecologically sensitive areas at the other end, from south to north instead of north to south. And we'd also support really decent size setbacks from the wetlands to avoid the adverse effects there. And I'd also just comment that I've only had a quick glance had time to have a quick glance of the proposed conditions set out in the section 42A report, and my quick glance makes me think that at condition 18 for ecological management, they're fairly vague, and we would expect to have a clear requirement for robust baseline ecological surveys to inform any of the management plans first up. So, and I think that supports what Mr. Payne had set out in his submission, his evidence as well. So yeah, that's what I would, that's all I have to say. It's a fairly high level summary of our submission, and that if you were of mind to grant it, we would expect to see some stronger ecological conditions in there. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just one question, Mr. Frank. The application proposes some strengthening of restoration planting along the eastern boundary and protection of the eastern escarpment. Have you had an opportunity to have a look at that ecological mitigation?
I haven't had a chance to look at that yet, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
I can, I'll take a look, yeah.
Morning, Ms. Snipe, Mark Geddes here. I'm not sure, did you manage to hear the discussion between Dr. Kiesling and Dr. Bramley yesterday?
No, I'm afraid I didn't. I was in meetings all day yesterday.
So they talked about, whether the forest remnant on the site, is in fact an SNA, whether it was an SNA, and a lot seems to depend on the representativeness criteria, and that depends on the context. And so the relevant context is the ecological district, not more locally. And so I'm just wondering, do you have any comment on that in terms of what the relevant context is for the representativeness criteria for SNAs?
Well, I think I'm not an ecologist, so I would need to seek ecological advice on that. So yeah, I don't want to comment on that at the moment.
Okay, no more questions from me.
All right, so in relation to your comments about impact on bats and herpetofauna, they're just high-level comments that there isn't any ecological evidence that you want to provide in relation to those statements?
They're high-level comments, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your attention to this matter and bringing these things to our focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. All right, so right, thank you. So Karen Hitchcock is here. come forward.
Welcome.
Just bring up your submission. Just give us a moment. And where the commissioner is appointed to hear the application, we introduced ourselves at the start of the hearing. My name is John Marston, Tim Vile and Mark Geddes. So we'll read your submission and really it's your opportunity to speak to that.
Okay. Aboriginal tourism slogan is untamed natural wilderness, and yet you want trucks to run past every 10 minutes. I run an accommodation business on Fitzherbert Street, Hokitika. We are in a rebuilding phase after the COVID pandemic, with tourists starting to have confidence to travel again. Hokitika does not have a heavy traffic bypass, so any heavy truck, tractor, etc. goes straight through the middle of town up Fitzherbert Street. I'm against the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of transport of the mineral sands from the mine at Mananui to the port of Greymouth. Having up to 6 truck transports an hour, 3 of which will be empty and therefore bounce more, will severely disrupt my guest restful sleep, which will impact my business, and as disgruntled guests like to leave reviews online. I sincerely hope and accept that you accept the recommendation of only operating during daylight hours of the transport.
Thank you. And that recommendation, where did you read that?
Oh, and the recommendation put out by the council.
Right. So you want a control on the hours is your principal request?
Yes, please.
Very clear, thank you.
So just, how far removed from is your hotel from the state highway, is it? So it's located on there,
It's
but is
directly on the state highway. So the first room would be 5 metres from the main road.
5 metres, right, okay. What's the address of it?
191 Fitzherbert Street.
Is that the Jade over?
Fitzherbert Court Motel.
Okay. Okay, yep, thank you. No more
Great.
questions.
So it's very clear. Thank you very much. Don't have any further questions. Thank you.
All right.
So the next submitter I have on the list is Frederick Failings. Frederick here? No? All right, well, we'll just have to wait for him. He's here?
He is here, but he just needs a little bit of time.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
So,
Sure, that's
would you like to hear from him shortly? Or
Yeah.
have him on tape?
No, we'll have Evelyn.
So Frederick is going to go and get his paperwork and
Okay,
present
does
it.
he want to see some time to sort himself out?
I think he does need about 5 minutes, approximate, yeah.
All right, well, let's just have a look at these conditions while we're doing that so we don't put pressure on them. So I'm at tab 10. And
Actually, we're not updated.
I haven't updated it.
Would it be useful to circulate that so that we're
Yeah.
talking to the changes that have been made?
Yeah. So will that be a track changes or just a clean?
Have been track
I've
changes.
got on the track and everything, so
It's all right. So where is that? Are you going to email it?
I need to email it to someone.
Tim,
If
you?
you email it to me,
I emailed you.
Okay.
I think what would be handy is a overview of the changes,
Yes,
and then we can go away and digest them.
Yeah.
And maybe come back and ask some questions at another time.
the changes that Mr. Lowe is talking about are the sort of what I would say tweaks that has been occurring through the course of the process. But if you haven't had an opportunity to read these ones, if you've got more material changes.
I've
Well, I'll look at the current version, but what I'd like to do is, if I could, is just to understand the structure of them. And the main components of the shift to this version here
Okay, so we don't need to below
from the
version.
version. Well, it's useful to have that anyway.
Okay. I'll just email you. I was going to email you, email it first.
all right.
So, Mr. Fane, are you ready to go, or can we do some other things?
Yeah.
Like
I'm ready to go. My name is Phil, not Phil.
feeling? Is that the correct pronunciation?
It's correct.
Come forward.
So it's not.
Yeah,
my time.
welcome. So we're the commissioners hearing this application.
Yeah, I figured that one out.
So welcome.
I'm I'm German. And I speak pretty directly. I'm not a government paid pure propagandist like development West Coast. You already, I'm very direct. Okay, first I want to raise some systemic procedural shortcomings that need to be raised. It's would have been nice if more of the public would be here and hear it. But the Arctic Guardian just recently published, here you can see it, council stuff back mine. And that is meant the regional council stuff. And I think this reaches any expected code of behavior from local authorities. That they take sides so early before even any hearing was done. And it is clearly a result of the first past the post local election system that favors fascism. This is a fact because fascists have the strongest coherence and other candidates just split the vote and enable minority rule. This is a practice. This is the local election system shortcoming here. And so this we have in the regional council, a councillor named Birchfield. He is associated with big gold and coal mining. And he indirectly, of course, also appointed the council staff. Indirectly, I'm saying. And this explains here the whole systemic shortcoming. Yeah, this should not never have. This is even commonly expected that local government stuff keep a kind of neutral face. You know, this doesn't look good and shows really pretty much that that hearing here is more of a propaganda PR performance. That's how it looks like. The other thing is you call objectors like me, Forest and Bird and others submitters. And I think it is highly time that this wording is changed. We are not submitters to authority, to medieval monarchs. It's time that we change the wording that befits a democracy. Yeah, I'm an objector You might be able to find a more general word for it, but submitter is quite insulted to the general public. Not everybody is on the oath of allegiance to a monarch in the general public. So this is just, you know, a procedural shortcoming that is meant, and that is tradition, to reduce or put people into a submissive state, mental state. That's just not all. Okay, that's enough of an introduction. I'll just read it so that I don't forget anything. Just in general, the main principle of protecting the environment on which we depend and which has created us is the minimization of disturbances and damages. This is an ongoing process, and even minor improvements count because they add up. However, creepingly and therefore unnoticed is the fact, and now it's noticed actually, West Coast development West Coast has shown how big mining is on the coast now, that mining became ever bigger and more destructive since the early gold rush times. Now shifting hills many times the size on many more sites, with 100 to 1,000-fold increase of energy use. Now mainly fossil energy called diesel. The gold mines I'm talking about, they are huge, they are quite environmentally destructive, but they're hidden from view, unlike that Mananui project. They're hidden in the Ayansi forest, they are just right over there, Renew and so on, two big gold mines, you can hear them 2 kilometers away, and so on. This has increased despite one gets the impression somehow it has decreased and the gold rush times were the worst. Actually, the world, it has increased steadily over the last century, really, creepingly, so that one doesn't really notice the difference because we haven't been there in the 1860s. And that needs to be realized. When West Coast development shows you graphs about the GDP is an absolutely insufficient measurement because GDP doesn't measure damage to society or so. It only measures money go around, employment and so on. And when you cause damage, you cause employment, of course, to repair it. Yeah, so GDP is absolutely insufficient, but of course, the big rich people use it because it hides their true effect on the environment. And that effect is ongoing, but it's also coming much worse. In Europe, you have now more and more ever hotter days. The records are breached almost every year. Bigger floodings. I come from Germany. The last flooding, I've never seen anything like this in my life there. So that's seriously something coming. And it's already there. And it's called global warming. And I'm not talking about carbon dioxide. This is only a secondary effect. It's a direct heating that we produce by burning fossil fuels. Because that's stored energy, stored millions of years, and we take it up in a hurry in the last 100, 200 years. And that has an effect, like everything in this universe, what you do, it has an effect. Just a matter of the degree of the effect. And when you see, and New Zealanders are not quite aware of it, the population overseas, in Europe, in America, is much higher. For example, in Germany, 20 times more for the same area of land. And the industry that uses combustion is much higher. And New Zealand doesn't realize that all the metal roofs and so on were produced, the steel for it mainly was produced overseas. So the energy that went into it, and it's huge energy to make molten steel and then form it, has been done over there, not here. Yeah. So New Zealand looks good in the picture. Because that is, and all the big machinery now, especially after the big factory was privatized to China, everybody has now a big digger and goes for it. This has an effect. This is huge energy cost by producing these heavy machinery and then running. So it is basically, we need to remove ourselves from the simplistic neoliberal get rich fast, boom and bust and rot plunder. By reckless, faceless corporations, we need to rein them in. And that is what the purpose of democracy is. Democracy is an optimization process, with limits and regulations in order to prevent extreme damages. But as you know, we haven't really got democracy, it's a monarchy. So it is therefore several decades long-term lower scale mining is environmentally and therefore socially preferable and required, because that immediately minimizes damages and disruptions locally. And it is also preventing the boom and bust nonsense. Yeah, we need to scale down and make it last longer. Then the effect on the environment is not that big, because the environment can cope and compensate for it in a smaller scale. Big scale, it's a serious problem. It makes serious disruptions. I read now the message I sent over email to Mr. Samuel Bly, the PR consultant, mining applicant. Question about the extreme fossil energy and water requirements of your methods, which is just another version of common outdated, extreme excessive gold mining hill shifting practice by boys failing to grow out of their big toy truck sandpit conditioning. Westland Mineral Sands has enough capital to modify its methods design, which could then result in a more acceptable practice, enabling easy continuation on other even adjacent areas after the site has been mined. The more acceptable you mine this site, the more readily you will be allowed to continue on other sites too. Last thing we want is to have such big mines spring out everywhere. And tourists in Europe, people in Europe are aware of this. They come here not to see big industry. This is a fact. They want to escape from it. They want to see nature, space, not overpopulation, not big industry. They have it there. And they have it actually better now. Scaling it down to a cheaper modified method with more stable, longer duration, not get rich fast, boom and bust tradition. And now here, 70-meter processor plant height is an extreme eyesore on the coast, except the concrete factories follow. Tourists and the general public want to see nature, not ugly industry like this, which they can see all day at home overseas. We should make ads warning tourists from coming here. Present design is crime against the general public. Time to rein in council, etc. fascism. Here I want to add, to stress it again, 70-meter is more than 4 stories. That would not be allowed in rural areas. Building consents. No need for more milk factory types. And what about the safety of this fully laden structure? It's laden with the heaviest material. metal containing sands, stone. You can't get that much higher in weight except when you have pure metal. And this is where the cyclist business you know, when cyclists, he talks about after the mine, when the cycling way has been produced there, with help of the mine and so on. But the 10 years during the mine, you'll see that shit, let's say it in plain English. You know, that high structure of the separation of the minerals from the sand, the pit and the damage to the topsoil and so on. You see it, they see it. And they definitely don't want to see it, even when they are keepers. They come here to cycle, be closer to nature, get some exercise and so on. Because they probably come from Auckland, Wellington and so on. Yeah. So what's the alternative I've already indicated, but I will go a little bit deeper into it to show a more effective way of mining. Yeah, I'm not totally, it would be unrealistic to say, no, stop it, don't do it, because, you know, you wouldn't listen. But so we need to make a compromise here. So, but the method, the Westland Mineral Sands is proposing is just too extreme. So we need a better method. And actually, Southwestland's history shows a better method, a far more efficient method. And I'm reading it now so that I don't forget anything. I now present the main constructive part of my objection. Let's start with Southwestland's boom and bust and rot history, because it actually shows a superior method. Dredges were used in lowland riverbeds and beach flats, and even in most remote lagoons. They were big but compact, containing all machinery on the floating platforms under a roof. The outstanding example was the Gillespie's Beach bucket dredge, because not only was it 1,000-fold harder in remote conditions than piece of Cape Mananui, but it was run by electricity in the 30s already. It got the electricity from Lake Gold 15 to 20 kilometers away. Again, in the 30s, under 1,000 times harsher condition than that place Mananui there. This piece of cake was there too. Yeah. And it even went to show the harsher condition is there at Gillespie's Beach. You find along the road that goes there, you find a small cemetery. But people died there under these harsh conditions. What people don't know is actually there exists even a second cemetery hidden just besides the original road that they cut into the hillsides in order to get the parts of the dredges down there. That was extreme, and still they could make it working. This was extreme conditions, really remote, and that is why tourists actually go there. They wonder could this have been done in such a remote condition at that time? And also seeing how nature slowly regenerates there. Today, at least the Mananui mine proposal, and that's what they are not mentioning here, is fundamentally basically run on diesel energy, not as electricity. They want to put up there the 45,000 liter diesel tank. This is big, especially when it is mobile oil colored or so. Yeah, you can see it. This is a big tank. While the power lines are right there. Yeah. And they use this diesel energy to pump. Now I flicked through and a few days ago I found pictures and actually how the mine wants to operate. To pump in average 1 kilometer all the sand that they undo with a dredge to the processing plant and back. An extreme waste of energy, extreme. That is why I have mentioned the traditional method, the compact method, where you actually separate the stuff right there where it is extruded from the sand. There the sand is taken. Right there, you leave it all there. You leave the natural contaminants there. You are not concentrating them on your processing plant. And you have much less, at least 10 times, if not more, probably even 100 times less energy use by doing it right there where you take the sand out. Because that you have to pump it on quite a high speed because else the sand would settle in the pipes and block them. So you need, and the higher the speed is with which you pump something through pipes, the energy requirement is not linear. There's a square involved. It's actually rising quite drastically. That's the same with aerodynamics in a car. And there's another very good aspect with that traditional compact method. At Mananui, the water level is several meters below the surface of the farmland. So when the dredge would contain this separation machinery on a smaller scale, it would mainly be hidden from view, from anywhere, because it's most of it would be down in the dredge point. Perfect. Not in a 70-meter high building right at the road for everybody to see. Oh, show me. Oh, look what I can do to the environment. Huh? To be a bit sarcastic here. And also, what the big boys with the big machinery always forget, they want to show off. So the machinery is orange, yellow, you know, bright painted. So to show, oh yeah, I'm working here, this big power. Whereas actually this machinery should be in green and brown color to reduce the visual impact. And that would be a strong reduction. So that you just don't notice them in the first place if possible. You know, we don't need silver colored TV shades everywhere staring into our face. And it would make sense that the consent process here is paused to give the sand mining applicant time to redesign the method. You see, make it smaller, make it longer lasting. You have stable, long-term work, long-term conditioning without too many tough changes, not boom and bust. This is far better for society. And it also then shows a better attitude that conditions the public better than the big boom and bust damaging machinery that is used. You know, the price tag comes later to the children. And we are already seeing this in the moment in Canada, huge fires everywhere. This is not just by accident. You know, this happened only fairly recently, the Californian fires, the fires in Canada, and even this year now. You know, 10 years ago, you didn't hear much about such stuff. It didn't happen. It's simply the warming is happening. Yeah, that is the result. So we, this price we all have to pay. They might extract in the short term good money out of it, but everybody else pays long term. But this is not new. You know, it's just that they don't want the public to talk about this. I also then, but that is basically already proposed. But it is much easier when you have a smaller mining scale that you basically remove the topsoil, park it on an adjacent land. And when the dredge has gone through, just shift it back with the least possible amount of energy and disruption and so on, and immediately sow grass, not waiting till gauze comes up, and then you have poison living style, and you can actually make it all better viable because most of that land will still be useful for cattle grazing. So there's no loss. You only have a very small section of that land, a very small section, probably less than 1%, being occupied by the mine. Everything else is still farmland and is used in it and provides income there. You don't have to make big bucks in a hurry. It's the wrong attitude. We can't afford it as a human race. Yeah, and you wonder why those environmental consultants can't think so far and didn't design such a method. I have flicked to some of the professional assessments, you know, on which that consent application is based. One of them is even in court format, just to make sure that if they don't get the consent, that they go to court and cause more cost and so on. Yeah, intimidation, basically. It feels like a death sentence to have to study them. And a large part is simply expensive blah, distracting from the obvious basic environmental incompatibilities that I've just described. Of course, such complicated paperwork discourages local neighbors from objecting because they can't find the real big problems in there because there's so much other things mentioned there. Forest and Bird has obviously a good idea about the Resource Management Act and its sections. Or rely on Forest and Border, for example, to connect what I'm presenting here with the relevant resource management sections. You know, because I don't want to occupy myself with such legal work. I have enough work to do. And
can I just pause you there?
Yeah.
We've got a morning tea break scheduled for 10:40. Do you want to, if you want to carry on for a further time, it might be a useful time just to.
Oh yeah, no. I've basically this is at the end of my paperwork here. All right. No, and I've said everything in a compressed way.
Yeah.
But hopefully good to understand and good to think about it, because the whole approach needs to change. Because when the European tourists now, or those who want to come here now, the real anti-environmental attitude of big New Zealand, they won't come here because it's not worth it.
Tim, do you have any questions?
No, you're very clear. Thank you. I've read your submission.
Yeah.
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you. Just a little bit of feedback. It makes me uncomfortable when you accuse people of being fascists.
It is, see, I can understand that you are uncomfortable and you should be so, but the problem is that fascism is usually only connected here in New Zealand to Hitler Nazi stuff. But it is actually a worldwide phenomenon. Because fascism is nothing else than gang rule warfare against the general public. This is what fascism is. Every dictator, and monarchs are dictators too, use fascism. They cannot be without it because somebody has to do the work for them. So it's very common. You see the Trump, you see Putin, you see Netanyahu. That's fascism what you are seeing there.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it just
And it is simply so. It's a fact that the first past the post system is minority and supports and favors fascism far more than not. And it has to be mentioned and it has to be raised. It was not there. I didn't mention it to incite you or so. I just mentioned it to make people see that this needs to be changed. Because this first past the post system prevents reasonable limitations and regulations with regard, for example, of such applications. Because the wrong people are then appointed into important positions, like councillors and so on, and making decisions in the favour of a minority.
Yeah. No, I'm just making the point that violence can be administered by language as much as other means. So you speak careful about that.
Yeah. Well, now violence is language is not violence. This is where you are going a bit far. It's just strong language, and sometimes you need to use strong language. I'm not here to present a stiff English upper level, so on, and behind the scenes I stuff things up. Now, the language can be inciting, sure. Violent, no. Violence is an activity, not language. And I didn't threaten you with cannons in my language. Yeah. So
No, it's just you weren't accusing me of being a fascist, I don't think, but it's just a bit of feedback about
See,
the quality of language.
The quality of my language is very good, but you have grown up under this system. And I'm quite sure that before my talking that you haven't realized that that first past the post local election system has that fascistic effect, which it has. That is the reason why New Zealand is in 1993 voted for a proportional representation, because they realized they didn't connect directly to fascism, but they realized first past the post was minority and didn't work. Yeah. So it has to be said in a very clear but factually correct manner in order to wake people up, to make them aware. And that, of course, when you have grown up under the system, you think that's all good, that first bumps into you. It's understandable, but that's only the first reaction. When you then begin to think, reflect on it, and bit by bit change it to a better optimizing system, then it has done its job.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Feeling. And we'll take your comments on board.
That was my intention.
All right, so I've just got to make a call in the morning tea, so we'll break now for 15 minutes. All right, so which document do you want me to open first?
The strike-through version and blank version are in effect the same set of conditions. The only difference between the two is the strike-through version shows the changes have made since the version that I liked.
Okay, well, let's look at the clean version.
So have a look at the clean version. As we maybe run down, I can highlight all the places between the two sets of evidence where I've changed conditions relative to this week.
The clean version shows it. There's a track change. Clean version does show it.
Track change is good.
I'll check you've got the correct clean version.
The conditions themselves shouldn't be deleted because they're pro-offered in terms of offshoring dust on the site, but we're not seeking consent. So,
Just check you've got the correct clean version.
Okay, so mine is dated, it says summary statement, appendix 1, clean 5 June. Might not be the correct version.
So when I send it to Tim to make sure it's correct.
I'm just wondering in relation to what you've just commented there, that you've offered those conditions of the title states in relation to the discharge.
oh, that should have been changed. You might be looking.
Oh, okay.
No, the version that I sent him this morning doesn't have a air discharge version on it, the clean version.
Strike through version, that's struck out.
Maybe it's just that the table of
Title has been updated.
conditions, the
And
TOC hasn't been updated.
Yes.
So I'll just update the field.
Yes, and then that should disappear.
Has disappeared.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, I was working off the TOC.
Let's solve that one.
So great.
So just working through if we can.
Yes.
You've added an advice note as to what you are not seeking.
Yeah, no, I've included that specific reference to that specific consent on the basis that it was applied for in the ADE.
Yeah.
Is it perhaps easier if I just run, because I kind of know what's changed across the version, or I can just run as we maybe in sequential order as we run down the consents. So I think across the consents, I've made a whole lot of bits and pieces changes or editorial changes to various conditions, just around improving clarity and consistency across the board. But in terms of, I suppose, more substantive things, I think the first thing to notice probably is through the consent, it's up through the hearing, there was some reference to various skip documents in the conditions, various plans and that type of thing, which were outdated, hard to find, and some of the request references were wrong. So I've now included 9 years schedules, which would form schedules 1 to 9 to the consents, and that's that PDF that was sent through to you.
Right, okay.
And they're referenced kind of as appropriate through the conditions, so that it's clear as to what each condition refers to.
So these are mostly referring to maps, are they?
The maps.
Yeah. And the management plans, they're not included, are they? 'Cause
No,
they'll be
as we
updated.
go down, there's a couple of the management plans that are at a stage where I think we've kind of agreed with the experts that they're pretty much there. It's appropriate for the condition to reference the draft management plan as being the one that version that's lodged for certification is in accordance with. I've done that, but otherwise, no, there's no management plans. So I guess as we move down, yeah, we've addressed the additional advice note in 1.1. I think the next notable change is through the bond conditions. I've made a few wee tweaks just to the language so that it's clear they apply to both consent authorities. And then,
So what can I just ask a question about the methodology for the calculation of it? What did you use the West Coast Regional Council methodology?
I can't answer that question.
Okay.
That was the bond that was proposed in the conditions lodged with the application.
Well, we good to have some clarity on that.
Something to come back to you on. Condition 5.2 is first time we come across the funding of the 2 drains that is new, and so there's a reference to that in the annual work program that is to be submitted. Probably address that a little bit later. We'll get to condition 7.5, which is the actual condition that materially addresses that.
So when you're talking about the bunds,
Yep.
the drain, are you referring to the plugs to stop the?
Yes.
Right.
Where is that mentioned?
It's Roman.
5.2A6. It's the first reference, and that's really just a cross-reference so the conditions.
Bunds to me means, like we've got on the side of on the site boundary, that's a bund to me, and I'm just wondering whether we're using the right terminology there.
Yeah, I'm not
100% sure what the right terminology is, but
that terminology came from the engineer, I suppose. So I'm reliant on that, but I'm not saying that's not. So it's something we have to go with.
As a matter of interest, ELI made a submission that came in this morning about rivers and what they mean and so forth. And is there a regional rule that basically authorises modification of farm drains and things, whatever their status?
There's a regional rule that refers to major farm drains. I would do it in front of me and tell you exactly what it does and does not control.
Just as a matter of interest, is what presumably is quite a permissive regime for farm drains.
Yeah, I think after reading that rule, I was satisfied that there was no additional consent needed that they hadn't applied for. So
yeah, I mean, I'm just.
applied. Yeah,
I mean, if the answer is there is a permissive regime, which there probably will be, does anything turn on the definition? Because that rule will be agnostic to whether it's a river or not. It will just say if it has this character as a farm drain, it's performing that function. You can do it, I presume. That'd be right.
I think there's probably rules in the regional plan that address modification of rivers. And the reason we don't have to deal with those here is because we've made the definition to see if it's not a river.
Yeah.
So I think there is some importance around it being a farm drain.
Okay.
not a river. Just informed the bond amount's been dealt with in the RFI, so there's
Yeah.
some information. So
I think it's essentially tied to the restoration.
The disturbed area at a cost per hectare, as well as the restoration at a different
Yeah.
cost per hectare
And the assumption,
and a contingency
yeah,
percentage.
the assumption is the bond wouldn't anticipate the site never being rehabilitated at all in its entirety, because there would have been enforcement. So it's a progressive thing. So it's the remnant area.
That's correct. And the RFI, I think, in effect, acknowledged the rise in costs and had, I think, gone from 160 up to 286 or whatever is now for conditions as well, based on recent things.
I think next major change is when we get to the management plan conditions. I suppose you call it section 6 of the conditions. And the main change I've made here is removing the deemed certification requirements. I think there was some submissions on that, and after discussing it with legal counsel for the applicant, they were happy for it to come out. So
What, the one that if the council doesn't respond, then it is deemed certified?
yeah. We go down to 7.1.
So just curious about what's the situation if the council doesn't reply? What happens?
They can take enforcement action.
I'm saying, so I think the situation, the original condition was if they don't, council doesn't reply to the management plan submitted to them, it's deemed to be certified as the council. So I'm just wondering what happens in the instance that they don't reply.
I don't want to talk about it. The deemed certification condition comes under scrutiny recently in the courts, and there was a fight that we needed on the West Coast, because I'm looking at West Coast Regional Council and the applicant, and I think there is not an issue with the council not replying.
Well, there's a question of whether we can impose an obligation on the council under conditions. If the council doesn't address the question, it actually is an enforcement issue that you probably won't encounter it.
We haven't had any issues yet,
So
Condition 7.1, relative to the version lodged with the application. Now there's some additional requirements to identify the canopy drip line prior to commencing the mining, to define the mining area, and that there's a suitably qualified experienced ecologist that's there. Next major change is probably down 7.8, and that relates to what I've called there the geotechnical commissioning study. And that's the concept that was discussed yesterday, whereby there's some study of the pit wall slopes early in the consent, early in the mining phase, and a requirement for a geotech engineer to produce a report for the mine enters the catchment of Ruatapu that confirms that the pit slopes are fit for purpose for across the scale dairy.
We talked yesterday about making sure that the risk was clear in those conditions, by what risks they were being designed for.
Yeah, so to,
Describing that particularly right, but
yeah, I know the concept you're addressing.
yeah,
And to make the conditions fit for purpose insofar as they relate to the way that matter's being addressed through this assessment, this advice about our condition 7.7, which provides context to the factor of safety that's been built into the.
thank you.
So as I read the way that commissioning study condition works, that advice that would all good is doing in terms of the basis to the initial outcome. No. Gonna move on. The next suite of relatively significant changes are under Indigenous habitat restoration and site rehab conditions. So I've reworked those conditions relatively substantively relative to what were in the application. A lot of it's structural in terms of what's proposed hasn't changed. It's just how the conditions require it to occur. In my view now, as it is clearer.
You say in that first condition 9.1A Roman 2, are you talking about the two wetlands being a total of 1.53, or are you talking about each wetland being 1.53?
Total. Yeah. And the reason, yeah.
Yeah.
Plans there as well.
Yeah. So 9.1 is intended to be the condition that sort of sets out in black and white terms what is to be constructed and where. And then 9.2 and 9.3 provide some bottom line requirements as to how that's to occur. But then the Indigenous Restoration and Rehab Plan is really what puts the meat on the bones and sets out in detail how 9.1 is to be achieved.
So that would describe the species and the aim of that restoration planning, will it?
Yeah, so it's got set out there it's got some clear objectives and clear requirements, but there was a version of that plan that was lodged December last year.
Yeah,
that's pretty fulsome.
It is. I've read it.
So I've amended this condition so it makes it clear that the plan that needs to be lodged and then implemented as part of these consensus to be generally in accordance with that version.
Yeah.
Dr. Keys is comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So just in terms of the objectives, is it more appropriate to lock them down in the conditions or in the management plan, which potentially could be subject to change?
In my view, something like this, I always prefer the objectives of the restoration plan to be set up top. And then the like 7 conditions.
They're at 9.5, have you seen
9.5, sorry, no,
Yeah.
I haven't scrolled down
it?
there.
No, yeah,
Yeah, sorry, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, 9.5 sets out the objectives of the plan. So I've done that for all of the management plans that are in this suite of conditions. I've structured them so there's this clear objectives for each one, and then there's clear minimum requirements for what they need to contain. So that's
Is 9.5 Roman numeral 1. So the third line after Totara, should it be and a rather than in a?
perhaps, yeah. I'm inclined to say yes, but before changing it, I
Yeah.
prefer to talk to Dr. Keesing just to confirm. Because I think those words do come from the original.
Just seems odd to describe those those dominant species as being within a subcanopy cosmos and pseudoplanics.
Yeah. The next major change is down in the rehabilitation conditions, which immediately followed. So I think there was when the conditions in the application were being finalised, there's a little bit of version control and the requirement for a rehabilitation management plan dropped out. So I've inserted a requirement for a rehabilitation management plan in conditions 9A and 9.9. And
is there any reason why? Oh yeah, six. Okay. So again, as you say, where relevant, you reference the draft.
yeah, and I think this is another. There's a
fairly detailed.
There's a fairly detailed plan, and it's appropriate to put that into the conditions to provide. Yeah, because that's what. And I've tweaked a couple of bits of wording within the rehabilitation management plan condition since I lodged my evidence. The main bits being deleted some reference to, and are you looking at the clean version? Are you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a clause in there that slipped in. You'll see it's gone. If you looked at the around not increasing the rate of groundwater drainage at the site, which after speaking to Mr. Recker is irrelevant here. So I've deleted that out of the version that I lodged with my evidence. And I've inserted a new G, which is around making it clear that the runoff from the pastoral areas is to be directed to those new wetlands.
Yeah, pastoral is spelled PASTORAL.
There might be one or two. Scroll down. Go into condition 12. It's the next major change. I think the commissioner were talking to Ms. Gillespie yesterday around the accidental discovery protocol condition. But I think you might have been looking at an old version, might have been the version of someone feel. But in consultation with the Marina, they had a really strong view as to what the accidental discovery protocol condition should be for this site. And they've sent us a copy and yeah, it's accepting that. I've inserted that version instead.
So what's the, to my question yesterday, I talked about the time delay. I was just concerned that the relevant people wouldn't have enough time to do what they had to do.
Yes.
Your witness had a different view, but I'm still sort of concerned about that. So what was the time period in the revised condition to start work again?
There isn't one.
No, there is. It's immediately advice.
Oh yeah, that's around advising of the students, but there's no like specified, or it was like 48 hours or 24 hours or something in the previous version in terms of how long they have to cease.
Oh, you've actually got B there. So you've got 12.1B talks about not resuming until you get confirmation from the consent authority that the may resume.
It seemed to have dropped into it after 12 into 31.
Yeah, we're gonna come to that now. Yeah, so I've kept that's earlier, we were talking about that it's no longer a discharge to there's never been a discharge to sort as part of these consents. The version of the conditions that was lodged with the application included a draft consent discharge to air permit and a bunch of conditions under managing discharges to air. Those conditions are effectively adhered by the company as a basis of physical review conditions in terms of it's their findings of certainty as to how they're going to be managing. Yeah.
So in the instance that the permitted activity standards of the regional plan were contravened, you'd have to stop, or you'd have to, it'll be an enforcement matter, I suppose, wouldn't it?
Well, they don't have a discharge record. So it's enforcement.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm mumbling a little bit, so I'll go. So I've
Project yourself.
rather than delete them, I've shifted those conditions up into the general conditions that apply to both councils, as there's no discharge to air permit to put them on.
Right. So that needs to be, the numbering needs to be fixed up.
It does, and the reason I haven't changed is just for transparency, and this morning I didn't back myself to renumber every condition from there on without stuffing it up.
I
So
understand that. There were two questions that arose in my mind while we're discussing this. The first is I was surprised you didn't include in the category of baseline effects, noise, which is sort of, you are within the permitted standards, as I understand it, so that, and it's a baseline, is that right?
Oh, no, I think they're outside of it. I know
That's right.
certain hours, yeah.
Certain hours, but there is still a baseline, isn't there?
yes,
And in terms of these conditions being OSIA, my view is that those, when we do the 104.1A assessment, it's those effects that would be remaining after the application of the standards and requirements of these conditions.
yes,
In other words, the effects of allowing the activity have to be done on the basis that these set the parameters of the consent.
yes.
That's how we would see it.
Yes. I guess on that basis can be no debate as well. What the applicant is seeking, it's permitted by the conditions as well. They're one and the same thing. It's draft.
Okay.
We drop down then into the Westland District Council conditions. 14.1, I've just included explicit reference to the map that I've now included in Schedule 1. And in the version lodged with the application, there was no specific condition that dealt with height limit of buildings. So I've inserted a new 14.3 that makes that clear.
Can I just ask a question on that? This is probably just pedantic, but should this be must not exceed a maximum height? Does that cause an issue if it turns out to be 16.8?
I can see your point, and yeah, I think I prefer your wording. So, yeah. I'll make that change.
Well, it is the design height, but
Yeah, but
Probably B as well.
Which one is this?
I'm looking at 14.3.
So saying that's.
Oh, it's a lot of it, they're trying, yeah.
yeah.
And what's that 17 metres calculated from?
I understood, yeah, that probably needs to be made clear as well. I understood it was 17 metres from ground hour out to where
That may not be what they're assuming. When they do their 17 metre calculation, they're just saying,
I think it was, but I can check that and make sure. Come back.
what are you proposing?
Must not exceed their maximum.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'd like to know that there's no debate about how we measure that.
I agree.
Must not exceed the maximum height of from.
From RL, nominal RL or something.
Just need to define it as.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Check what it's designed for.
Yeah, I'll come back. There's various changes to conditions in 15. Then almost exclusively to address tweaks that transport agency wanted. So we've made those, and the version of conditions I've got in there is the version that the transport agency in effect signed off on with their letter. And it's subject to a few minor tweaks that they suggested in that letter, and I've made those in the latest version, changing the name from Wakakotahi to transport agency, things like that. And 16.4 D around the traffic management plan. I think there was some discussion yesterday about needing to include something in there around safe driver behaviour around pedestrians, particularly cyclists. And I've, after consulting with that expert, I think inserted that additional clause, additional requirement. The next relatively substantive suite of changes is in the lighting conditions. So there was, in the version lodged with the application, there was some conditions that committed the operator to achieve certain lighting standards, but there was no audit or compliance check that demonstrated that they were complying with those conditions. So I've inserted the new 17, 3, 4, and 5 that require a lighting audit at the site. And for that audit to be repeated or updated at a later date if this material changes made to the lighting as well.
Comfortable that lux is the relevant thing to be measuring there. Just note that we did a district plan change on that. They struggle to measure lux, but I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, that's what the standards that are.
Yeah, I know that's what the standards come from, but yeah, I'm just saying it can be tricky to measure, I think.
I think the applicant has experience with conducting that type of audit at the 9 Mile site, so I think it's something that they're fairly comfortable with. Move down to the noise conditions. They are fairly consistent with the conditions that were lodged with the application, subject to a couple of minor tweaks. I guess the main one is around in condition 18.3A around when there's a lot of noise monitoring needs to be undertaken, just so it's fairly clear as to when that occurs. And I understand, talk to people that it's once the wet concentrated plant's up and running with the mining, that's when it's running full swing. That's when the initial noise monitoring should be undertaken.
So thereafter, how often is it undertaken?
After that, I don't understand there to be any additional requirements of those conditions.
Question about 18.6.
Yep.
3-metre high noise control bonds are constructed for the minimum extent shown in schedule.
Yes.
Right. So it's just trying to understand what you're saying there. Is that saying that they potentially could go beyond the minimum extent, or that is extension to construct?
I guess it is saying that it's setting a minimum extent of bunking. But I wouldn't be opposed to the minimum being taken out of the condition. We reached the fauna management conditions, which in consultation with Dr. Keesing, I've reworked into a structure that I'm more comfortable with in terms of a fauna management plan with clear objectives and then requirements. The main thing in response to some discussions yesterday around native bird nesting, I've made a couple of minor tweaks to the condition which addresses that matter. And otherwise, there's nothing in particular I'd draw your attention to there in 19.1, 2 and 3, other than that's not one of the management plans that's in a state where we can directly reference a draft version. That's one that will need to be pulled together, posted a grant of consent and certified by the council. We drop down to 19.4. I think the last version of conditions I had around fish salvage, there was a bit of uncertainty as to exactly where it needed to occur. So that condition actually should include reference to a schedule, but in the schedules is I think Schedule 5, top of my head.
You've got a reference to a schedule there, Schedule 7.
Is it? Oh, I have. Yeah, Schedule 7. Sorry. Yeah, so I've amended the conditions, so it's pretty clear as to what drains we're talking about with fish salvage needs to occur. And I've used the same terminology in that condition as is used in the actual map that's provided in the schedule, so it's clear where they apply. Down to condition 21, the archaeology conditions. So they've been updated since the application was made to reflect the recommendations of Ms. Gillespie. I guess the more substantive changes is to identify the area in 21.2 where there's to be a certified qualified archaeologists on site with the initial topsoil stripping is being undertaken because of the higher potential for heritage items to be found in that area. We drop down to the regional council consent conditions. The version lodged with the application simply required an erosion and sediment control plan, was silent on the site-specific erosion and sediment control plan concept, where there's sort of an annual sub-plan that's a whole lot more detailed and deals with each bit of area as you move around, which is fairly standard for this type of activity, and I think other similar activities on the coast. So I've just inserted that. Consultation with that is expert as well to make sure the wording is as they wanted. So that's the new condition 23.3. Then we get to the fund conditions in 24 and 5 and 26 around water. So maybe we'll talk to the structure as we start, if that's helpful, because there's some fairly substantive changes to those relative to the version that was included in the application. So up front in condition 24.1, we've got I suppose a part of these is a management plan, which has a structure that is now consistent with that we discussed before, with some clear objectives and requirements. Following that, I should say before I move through these, I was involved in some fairly substantive back and forth, including discussing the actual wording of conditions with representatives of Ruatapu over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I think what we've got here is actually a substantively improved set of conditions relative to what was originally in there.
Yeah, I mean, those objectives are really good. And I had a concern around the conditions beforehand, but that looks really good.
Yeah. So, and I guess one of their interests as well was around how these conditions read. So, in terms of a sequential structure, as to if you read through them, they make sense. Like there's a management plan, there's a baseline data requirement, there's this, there's that, so that sort of picking them up, it kind of, it's not so confusing. And so as a result of all that, we've made a whole lot of changes, and I think some of that's referenced in the letter that you've probably seen.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
there's a lot of thought gone into that correspondence.
There has, and I think there's been a genuine effort on all sides to actually be constructive. So yeah, I found the process invaluable. So yeah, it's been really good. So if we're talking to that structure, then there's the management plan up front. There's now some very clear requirements around baseline data collection in what is now 25.1. And I've included some new plans and schedules which define exactly where the monitoring is to occur and the baseline data collections to occur. Then we get to the Water Management Commissioning Study condition, which we touched on yesterday as well, just a record around some more intensive examination and monitoring and testing of the activity before it, in its early stages, before it enters the catchment of Te Wharewae.
So when you, and sorry, just stepping back to 25.1, when you talk
Yeah.
about mining activities, does that include the construction of the treatment plant as well? So,
No.
so nothing's happening on site,
No,
or is it just the extraction?
yeah, I agree with mining activities is the extraction.
Yeah.
Perhaps I've tried to clarify that with the advice note in 25.1, that site
Okay,
escapes
yeah,
work.
yeah.
Because, and construction works are not restricted by that condition.
Okay, yeah.
Don't impact on water management.
No. I guess the alternative way of addressing the set of conditions like this is to have this whole lot of definitions up front as to what everything means. I've seen those in other mining consents, but in this case, didn't say it was necessary, but if commissioners think that it would be helpful to clarify.
I think we're on the way you've done it, yeah.
Monitoring, then we get to the basic monitoring requirements, which I'll talk through in a little bit more detail soon. Would help. Then the burn, flare, trigger, action, response, and TARP kind of aspects of the consent. So rather than leaving those to be specified in the management plan, Mr. Reckery and Dr. Fitzpatrick have come up with a set of triggers that they're comfortable with. And as I think they might have talked about yesterday, the basic concept behind them is around managing the activities internally in terms of effects on water quality, water levels, and you pick things up inside the site before it has a chance to go off site and cause problems.
Yeah. That's 28.
Yes, 28. Yeah. And by inserting them in there as actual conditions, there's some certainty as to what you're going to consent for, I suppose, as well. And then after that is an annual monitoring report. Annual monitoring report requirement as well. So that's the basic sort of package of water management conditions, which at first glance, there's a bit in them. But I think to me, they're not overly complex relative to water management conditions I've seen in other mines around New Zealand. And I think they make sense and they're fairly clear. So I'm fairly comfortable that they're fit for purpose and possibly a bit more rigorous than perhaps from a strict technical sense the experts consider necessary, given the nature of the activity and its potential for effects. But I think given the importance of the cultural value attributed to the whare adjacent to it, yeah, the applicant's happy with that context as well.
Do you think it's worth clarifying what you mean by a statistically significant change? So I know when one of the experts was speaking yesterday, they sort of talked about years of evidence or years of monitoring to be statistically significant.
I think we have, actually, in terms of working through these, would you prefer? Yeah, would you prefer to work through like water management plan condition in any more detail, or just want to jump to any of the questions of little bits and pieces?
Well, it's up to chair really.
Well, I've read them, yeah, so I don't need to be explained to me. But
Okay. Okay, well, I'll ask you a question then. I've worked with Mr. Recker and Dr. Fitzpatrick on those, that question you've asked, because the last version of the conditions were vague in that context. So if we drop down to 28.1, I suppose it's the first time we get to a statistically significant change. Maybe the trigger for aluminium. So what we've done in there is now there's some additional text below the table which specifies what baseline conditions are, how you calculate them. And then the wording as I read it is it defines what a statistically significant change is in terms of it says more than 20% from baseline conditions. So I read all of that as a package as being fairly clear what the trigger is. And I think it's fairly clear to the scientists in the room as well. So.
And so it's clear in terms of how many samples or how much monitoring data is required to be statistically significant.
Well, I think that's.
So is that be the preceding 12 samples?
Yes. That's the monthly. That's from the monthly. The 12 months of baseline data that's collected. And that's what that condition references, where it specifically ties it into the baseline monitoring undertaken in accordance with condition 25.1a. So that's the baseline data collected before the mine gets there.
Okay. Yeah, because what I'm trying to avoid is an argument over what's statistically significant in terms of how much monitoring you require, but as long as you're specifying how much monitoring you required, then what percentage change is going to be statistically significant.
Yeah, I guess
over how many samples, that's fine.
Yeah.
I just this I suppose I didn't read it that way.
Yeah, to me it's clear in terms of it referencing the baseline data, and then the sample to be a statistically significant change of 20% or more from that baseline data. Is there any other questions while we're there on the water, or should we move on somewhere else? Cool. The only other I think that's about it in terms of substantive changes actually through the consent conditions itself. So other than 30.4, which is a fairly standard condition that you would have seen a number of times. I've just amended that so that it's fit for purpose, I suppose, for this activity, given there's no direct discharges to water, and it only applies to any diffuse discharges from the site through groundwater.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think it's about it.
Thank you for that.
Just a couple of very minor ones. Just consistency of must versus shall.
I thought you were about to say that as soon as you started that sentence.
No.
So just to find the place for that one.
Yeah.
And
Have you got a preference? Is it must?
Comes from our compliance, so it must.
Must.
Yep.
Must from residents.
And also just turning to your schedules briefly.
Yes.
I had a discussion with Ms. Crawford, if it's your schedule 2 landscape mitigation plan.
Yes.
It would be clearer to have an updated version of that which showed the actual area proposed to be vested and reserved. Because what we've currently got is a plan which has land to be avoided.
Maybe we could address that now, actually, because yeah, where's the condition? 9/11. Yes. So I read 9/11 has been fairly clear as to what the reserve that's ultimately vested needs to contain.
Yeah.
And that it needs to contain the specific restoration areas. That have plans attached. I just wasn't sure there was a need for something else. That's all, in the way that condition worded today, if there's any sort of minor tweaks about the exact location of the boundaries of that reserve that's ultimately vested allows that to happen through that process, rather than tying it into something specific.
Or what conditional wording does, but then I think there's more flexibility.
If it assists from a legal perspective as well, one thing that we've been considering, for a couple of years as part of discussions around this particular offer is the need when you subdivide to potentially provide land access as well. So that might be, for example, an extra area along the strip of the dock reserve or something, so that there is legal access to the area that's going to be offered to mana whenua. So there's a few, I guess we wanted enough flexibility in the conditions that the boundaries may slightly change. It will probably only change to increase as opposed to, will only change to increase as opposed to decrease based on that condition. But until the mining activity actually occurs, the rehabilitation occurs, it's fenced, the weeds are taken out, that subdivision process won't be in a position to occur.
Comfortable with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Only a couple. Just I talked to Mr. Rocky yesterday about potentially alerting the neighbours down groundwater gradient about the if there was a sort of a pour or some contamination in the water, and just to give them the ability to be able to sort themselves out. I can't see where that is.
If we go down to the triggers for, I think it's 28.2. 28.2. So there's a process set out in there for what happens if there's a trigger. And there's a process around collecting confirmation samples and determining cause and effect and that type of thing, B and C. And then D is part of that is notifying downgrading well owners.
Yeah.
I think your point about timing.
Yeah, and I think my point was that A is 5 working days after receipt of laboratory results, so they for a start they could be drinking contaminated water for 5 days, and then there's the process from there.
I think there's important context there that perhaps I could talk to Mr. Ricker about and come back to you on in terms of the pace at which this groundwater moves, insofar as if you're triggering something inside the site at this bore, there's actually a considerable distance between that and the nearest drinking water supply. And the amount of time between that, whatever that abnormal result happens to be, and that water reaching that water supply could be quite bad. So perhaps if
sounds fair enough.
I'll discuss that with him and come back to you as to what's.
Yeah.
So I just hate to set it up so that there's necessary alarm raised, I suppose.
Yeah.
For neighbours when confirmation samples might come back 5 days later and say there's no issue, something like that. So,
but I suppose it could come back and say there is an issue, and if it is drinking contaminated water for 5 days.
I guess that depends on the discussion.
Yeah, it does.
Regular in terms of how long it takes to get there.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. And the only other comment was the training of staff, and I see some of the conditions talk about that. I was just wanting to know whether they all talk about that, particularly in relation to just making sure. I think the original conditions talked about ensuring staff were aware of the management plans, but didn't necessarily make sure they were trained to implement them.
I'm always kind of nervous in these types of management plans when you're dealing with these types of operations, often requiring sort of detailed training requirements to be set out in the management plan for the Descent Authority to certify
Mm.
on the basis that the condition is fairly clear as to what they need to achieve. And my experience with these types of companies where they have these large mining operations is they've quite detailed rigorous training programs to make sure they comply with the conditions. And it doesn't seem to me that inserting those training requirements into a certified management plan that then is kind of certified by the council and you have to operate in accordance with it is the best or necessary to start with, and not necessarily the best way to go.
So
I think
you've got that in some of your conditions,
council
haven't you? You've got that in some of your conditions.
Yeah, I think there is.
You talked about training there, I noticed it, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, to the extent there's a couple in there around training, it's possibly I think it's in the water management plan. But yeah, as a general concept, that would be my view on it, but I'm not, it's not now necessarily.
The potential issue then is if you're relying on that process and for whatever monitoring to occur, but if the staff aren't trained to, if there's no certainty about the staff, what level of training they have,
that doesn't then become a compliance issue for the applicant, and that they've got if these conditions are right, they'll set up some outcomes that the consent holder has to achieve in the environmental context. And it's kind of the management plan has to demonstrate to the council that how they're going to achieve, they can achieve them.
I wonder if it is this, we've actually got it in there at 6.2 in the general management plan condition, in the management plan condition, in the noise and vibration management plan, that's in the dust management plan. So is there any other additional areas?
No, I was just really inquiring as to whether it was normal.
I know, I was thinking I might stop you guys because it's whether it's offered.
I guess.
Oh, I do, I mean, it's happen.
I guess it's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got other consents and other ones where they don't have it for that purpose, but if it's there.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's all from me.
Yeah. It's a stylistic thing, but in the table of contents, your headings, you've got general conditions for WDC and WCRC, which probably doesn't describe what they are because they're not for them, but for their consents. But and then you say Westland District Council conditions, probably slightly different wording I would use, but
I agree.
like four headings, conditions to apply to WCRC discharge permit. The language suggests to me something in the future, whereas these would be just the conditions applying to the permit. So I just call them specific WCRC discharge permit conditions. There's something about the way to apply to, which doesn't describe what these are, which is the conditions attaching to them.
I agree.
But no, other than that, that's very useful, and that gives me a good summary of where we've got to. So thank you for that. All right, well, that's lunchtime, and resume with submitters. Hey, how are they coming at 12:45? Is that what you're anticipating? So we'll come back at 12:45 to receive those submissions for statements of opposition and support.